So once you get to late spring and summer, that's a really good time to be thinking about repotting houseplants. So we have still got a bit of time this year that we could repot our houseplants. So you don't need to do it too often, but certainly if you've had a plant in the same pot for at least maybe a couple of years, it's probably time to think about repotting it. You can certainly tell as well if you take the plant out of the pot and the roots seem to be going kind of round and round, it's time to repot it then. Also, we've got them here as well in store, you get plants in really little pots. These plants can't last very long in a pot as small as this, so it's a good idea to pot them on when you get them, because although they look really cute in the little pots, it's not the best for the plant in the long term, so it's a good idea to pot them on. So when you're potting things on, what do you do? Where do you start? Well, what you're best to do is, say for example with this plant here, this calathea, it needs to go into a bigger pot, but nothing too big. You don't want to go from say this size to something twice the size, because that's just going to stress the plant. It's also going to give it too much soil where there's no roots. So there's a chance that the roots could rot because the soil is going to be wet and there's maybe no roots there. So you don't want to go too big. So I would say if you've got a plant with a pot this kind of size, you'd maybe be thinking of going up to that size. So you want a little bit of, I don't know if you can see that, but a little bit of room around the edge of the pot so that there's fresh compost all around, but just so there's maybe a centimetre, a couple of centimetres kind of round the edge of the pot. Start out, make sure you've got a pot obviously that's got holes. That's really important. You need to let the water drain out for when you're watering. And it depends on the plant, but as a general rule, obviously there's houseplant potting mix that you can use. So that is good for things that are quite sort of leafy, like these calathea, like the ferns, the ficus, that kind of thing. If you've got more cacti and succulents, they like something that's really quite free draining. So this is a specific potting mix for that, just so it doesn't hold on to too much moisture. But you can use the houseplant potting mix and add in either some grit or perlite, and that'll just open up that soil and just allow it to be a bit more free draining for your cacti and succulents. Or, I actually quite often just use a peat-free multi-purpose compost. So I actually have this one here, and I've used that for my houseplants at home as well, because it's quite a nice sort of fine crumbly mixture. So it does hold on to moisture, but not too much that it's gonna rot the roots or anything. It's a good mix for a houseplant. So what you would do is you would take your houseplant that you're wanting to repot and just gently take it out of the pot, and then get your new pot. And now that pot is a little bit deeper, you can probably see, than this. So we'll put a little bit of compost just down at the bottom. Let's test that and see. Just a wee bit more. So yeah, so once you've got it in, it should be just below the top. You don't want it right to the top, because then it means when you go to water it, the water can kind of spill out and it's just a little bit too high. You're better to kind of have it just maybe about a centimetre below the top of your pot. And then what you need to do is just fill down the sides. So just fill down the gaps and make sure, just gently kind of get the compost down all the sides, because you don't want any air pockets down the sides. You want that to be nice and full of soil. Just give it a shake as well to get any soil moving. Okay. So that's how it should look once you've kind of top dressed your compost. And then the other thing is, sometimes plants maybe aren't looking quite as good as when you first got them, and because they're needing repotted, sometimes some of the leaves might have kind of gone over a bit. Well, there's no point in keeping that leaf on the plant, because that's it dead now. So it's just using energy that it could do with in the healthy part of the plant. So you can have a little bit of a tidy up as you go. So if you just take scissors or secateurs and just snip out those parts, and you can just discard of those. And that'll just neaten things up, and then just give it a really good water. Don't let it obviously sit in water, but just water it through, and then you can let it sit for maybe say half an hour in a saucer of water if you'd like, but then let it drain out. So that is what you can do with that. And obviously same goes for these in smaller pots. You would just do the same process, but so something that kind of size, I would probably go for maybe something maybe that size maximum. Could even go slightly smaller just to pot it on with, just so it's not going into anything too big. And with this one, again, you could go that sort of size pot, or you could even go maybe just slightly bigger. So obviously these plants, they will get quite a good size eventually, especially the little ficus, that can get quite tall and quite bushy. But if you just gradually pot them on into the next size, that is the best way you can do it. So maybe like either every year or every 2 years, certainly you could kind of pot things on into the next size. The other thing you can do with a lot of houseplants is you can split them. So not all houseplants, but there's quite a few like peace lilies, calaphias as well. You can split, you can divide. So if they're getting too chunky and you're thinking, I don't have space for a pot that big, but you can divide them, and then you can either have several of that houseplant in your house, or you can give away some as gifts. And they will obviously, once they establish, they will bulk up again and they will become bigger plants. So it can seem a bit drastic, but it's actually really quite good for them. It's quite a healthy thing to do. So for example, like this one here, you can probably see there's quite a few different sections here, clumps of the plant. You can see there, that's a separate section, that's a separate section. So, I mean, with a plant this size, you could potentially say even split it into, well, you could even split it into 4 or 5, but I would maybe split it into 2 or 3 sections. So it should kind of just come away gently like that if you just split it. But you can also, you can use like a knife or something like that, just a sharp knife, to kind of split it just like that. But there we go. And that's a section just coming off there. So you would just tease that out and then just get your pot. Obviously, like I say, nothing too big for that size of plant. So say if you were just separating off this little section here, I would just pot that up into something that kind of size initially. And yeah, and then they will bulk up and they will become really nice, healthy plants. So that's another thing you can do when you are potting things on, is just kind of divide things up. And then obviously lastly, if you just give your plant that you've potted up a good water, because you put it in fresh compost, you won't need to feed it straight away as much through the autumn and the winter, so you wouldn't need to feed them as much through then. But certainly after maybe say a month or so, the plant will have used a good bit of the nutrients in the compost, so then you can start to kind of feed again. But if you're potting as late as this, you probably wouldn't need to feed again this year. Certainly if you're repotting in the spring or early summer, then it's a good idea to, after maybe 4 to 6 weeks, start feeding your plant again with a houseplant feed. Or again, if you've got cacti and succulents, there is a specific feed for those as well, because they don't need quite as strong a feed as some of the more leafy houseplants that you can get. But I hope this helps to show you kind of that it's quite easy and it's good fun kind of pottering about to repot your houseplants. It is a good idea as well to maybe have like a tray or something. It just keeps things a little bit tidier. You can just put your compost into that, and if you're making your own kind of mix up, like I'd said about maybe adding some grit or perlite, then it's quite a good idea to have the tray, because you can kind of get all your potting mediums into this and then kind of mix up. Yeah, that's kind of all you need, is some compost, some new pots, and away you go.